Release the Kraken!
Greetings, fellow game designers. Ron here at Lame Duck Studios, and today we're going to talk about how to make this balloon effect. Now, I've been talking about this effect quite a bit in the last couple of videos, just because it's not a very straightforward thing to do, and I had to jump through a lot of hoops to get this accomplished for one of my projects. And I was like, if it took me a minute, it might take somebody else a minute, and I'll help everybody else out. So if you're making a mobile game like me, you've probably encountered something along the way where you can't just do cloth physics inside of a mobile environment. It's just not really supported. So what I ended up doing was a bit of clever workaround to get this effect by rendering it out by hand. So that's what we're going to do today, is just kind of get this going and show how this is done and how you can get this into Unreal and run it without having to run an actual cloth simulation. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just start a new project here. So I'll go to New Scene, and we turn my grid on. It won't make the balloon because that's what I already have. I'm going to go ahead and grab a sphere and zoom in on that, and I'll scale this up some amount. The precise amount doesn't matter, and yeah, I'm going to go ahead and use scaling because this is going to be very quick. I'm not going to be very precise on this. It's more about the technique than it is about the actual end product. And I'll go ahead and make this one somewhat balloon shaped. I'm going to go up to modeling and then deformers, and I'm going to throw in a lattice here. Let's see what my lattice default is. I think a 2x2x2 is good. And I'll hit apply. It should be good, and then I should be able to grab some lattice points, and then I can grab those. And I will scale using middle scale, that way I don't compress this unevenly. And this is pretty much how I made the balloon. And then I'll just kind of raise this up here. And I'll check my side view, make sure that I'm not squished in any weird way. And I'm going to grab the balloon, and once you create your lattice and you have your effect, you want to bake this out. So all you got to do is clear the history on it, so delete history. Now you have a baked object. Awesome. And I'm going to go ahead and clear my transforms just to make life easier. So modify, freeze transforms. Okay, so here is my balloon, and I'm going to raise it up so that it is on the ground. This part doesn't really matter, but wherever you want your balloon to float. So if your balloon's floating, wherever position it's going to float in. Okay, go ahead and name this one balloon. And then I'm going to make one duplicate of this. I'll hide my first one by using Control H, the way it's out of the way. And my second one, I'll just make this one my terrible balloon. There we go. And for this one, I'm going to do a remesh, because when we want to tear this using like a cloth simulation, we want to be able to have this be randomized, and this grid pattern is going to be too blocky. So we want to make sure that this is nice and crisp. So I'm going to go up to Mesh, come down to Remesh, hit the options, and we'll hit Reset. And then you can do it automatic, but you'll get some various stuff. I'm going to go ahead and hit Custom, and I do this first one is the length of each one of your lines, the amount of travel each line can have. So the shorter you make this, the more slices you're going to get. The larger you make it, the fewer slices you're going to get. And if you're doing mobile, you're going to want to keep your poly count pretty low. So 5 worked for me, and then about 80 on the percent threshold was pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. And this is going to go through and do the remesh. And you can see how I got this sort of pattern here. Now you can go through and run this cycle a few different times to get a different result. Let's say I don't like that. Maybe I want to go down to maybe a length of 2, and I can do apply, and then it'll do this, Or you can Control Z a couple times to go back to your default and then rerun it, and then you'll get something like this. So go through and get the one that you like, whichever one's fine. And I'm going to hit close, and you can see once you close it, you do have an update modifier on here. So you can update live right in this little window without having to Control Z anything, which is real handy. So I can just go ahead and throw 5 in there, and it'll rerun it for me, and it's cleaned up. And if I don't like that, I can go back and hit 2, and I don't have to worry about it running it a second time. It retained its shape. So this is pretty good. I'll do 3 just to make it interesting. So I have that. I'm going to clear the history on it. Whenever you do these, just go ahead and clear it. Maya is very node based, and everything you do ends up as a node up here in your tree, basically. So you want to get rid of some stuff. Some things won't clear right away, and we'll go over how to get rid of the things that don't clear. All right, next thing on the list is I want to pre-fragment this mesh, and I also want to do the UVs on it. So first things first is doing the fragment. So I'm going to go into my perspective view, and I will go into edge mode here. I want to cut this along certain parts of my balloon. So if you want the balloon to pop at the top, that's fine. Or if you want the balloon to pop at the bottom, that's fine. For my game, I did a pop at the bottom, but you're welcome to pop the balloon however you like. So I'm going to go and I'm going to turn my grid off by clicking this little checker box. That way I can see what I'm doing. And I'm just going to go up from the bottom or from wherever point I want the tear to be. And I'm going to just hold shift and go through and click the pattern. And what's nice about this being kind of jagged is it's very naturally torn, more or less. So there's like one tear, and then I'll go up another area. And here's another tear. And then I'll do a third tear. I'm not going to go too many. But however many tears you want, the more you do this, maybe the more natural or random you're going to do it. This is going to be a baked effect, so this is going to be the same effect for every time it runs. Clear that one. Okay, so let's say I'm happy with that. I'm going to go up to Edit Mesh and then hit Detach. And what that does is it splits the mesh where we cut it. So you can see there's a little tear in there, which is great. That's what we're going to need. I'm going to take that, and I'm going to do the UVs. So I'm going to go up to UV Editor. Pretty much going to do a projection from, let me do the top here. Y, I'll hit Apply. That gives me a top projection. And then I'll go UV, double click it, and you can see the splits are already in there before we cut the mesh. So I'll just double click, and then I'll hit Unfold. And now here's my unfolded balloon. I'm going to go down and then hit Layout. So under Arrange and Layout, we're going to hit Layout. Okay, so now our UVs are all laid out. And once again, we are going to clear the history on this because every time you do some stuff, you get history. So we're going to clear that. And I'll save this as the tutorial project. So I'll do this as balloon. Say terrible balloon tutorial. Okay. So now I have this effect, and I want to make this into a piece of cloth. So I'm going to go up to Modeling, go to Effects. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this one. Control D. And on the duplicate, I'm going to name this one Sim, because I'm going to need a simulated one. I'll turn off my other one using Control H, that way it's out of the way. And then on my simulated one, I'm going to run a simulation. Oh, I didn't clear my my transforms here on either one, so let me go ahead and grab all these here. And I'm going to go ahead and just real quick freeze transforms. I did that earlier, but then I moved it. Okay. All right, so I'm clear. That doesn't really matter as much, but I'm just picky. Anyway, so go ahead and grab your mesh, in cloth, and then create in cloth. So now we have a cloth, and set your timeline to however you like. The more frames you have, the more time it has to process the effect. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to do this as 120 frames, and that's good. And if I were to run this, you'll see it does some falling, which is fine. You see it kind of collapses and such. It has a bit of a cloth effect already, which is nice. And then to get this to be kind of poppable, normally what you would do is you would go up to Constraints and you would use the Tearable Surface option. But because we cut it ourselves, we don't have to use this. So all we have to do is create a passive collider. So I'm going to grab a sphere here, and I'll go to my front view. I'll go into wireframe, and for my effect, I just sized this sphere about like so, and then I cleared its transforms just to make life easy. That way my default size is 1. And then at frame 1, I just hit S to key it all. And then at some point along my timeline, maybe around frame 6 or so, I very quickly expanded it. And then hit S on that. And then very quickly, like right after frame 6, maybe frame 7 or 8, I dropped this down to something minuscule. So it's kind of out of the way. But you can, again, travel the effect however you like. So, and I'll hit S on that to get those in. And then I'm going to take my sphere, I'm going to go up to End Cloth, and then I'll come down to Create Passive Collider. So now that my sphere is now a passive collider, if I go ahead and grab him and run the effect, you can see there it is doing the effect here. So let's go into, I'll press 6 to bring up the color. I'll throw a shader on here just to make it nice. I'm going to grab this guy here. And I'll change my Phong to a color that I like. I'll pick this red here. I already have it set. And then some amount of transparency. Yay. All right. And then here we go. So we have this sphere. And I can go ahead and hide the sphere. It being visible doesn't matter. It should still run the effect. And then there we go. So there is the cloth effect. Okay. And if I hit play, you can see it running real time. So hey guys, future me here. I just realized I did a terrible disservice and I did not show you guys what frame rate to use. So go up to Window real quick and come down to Settings and Preferences, and go down to Time Slider. You want to make sure for this that you're setting it to play every frame. Whenever you're doing a simulation, you should have this to play every frame. And then have your max playback speed set to 24:1, and that'll give you your best result. Okay, go ahead and hit save. And continue with the video. Okay, so now we have the simulation, and I'll go ahead and just save my simulation out. Now what I want to do is I want to go through and pick the frames that I like for it. Now you can do all the frames if you like, but that's a lot of frames. I'm going to go ahead and just capture my default frame. So I already have the balloon at default position. So I'm going to go ahead and go to like frame, we'll do frame 6 here. I'll grab the simulated one. I'll do Control D. That's going to bake that position out. So if I hide my simulation, you can see that there is one that doesn't change when the sim runs. I'll turn my sim back on by hitting 1 over here. And I'll hide my clone. I'll go forward some amount on the timeline. I'm going to jump to 20, but again, the more steps you put into this, the better it's going to look. So there's the next one, and I'll do Control D, and then I'll go ahead and hide that, and then I'll go forward to some other amount, maybe 50, Control D, and I'll do one more for good measure. Right there around 70, sure, Control D, and then I'm going to hide my simulant, and then I'm going to grab my my default terrible balloon. I'll go ahead and just move this down with middle mouse so it's in my group here, so I'll put that at the bottom. Now let's go ahead and grab all these. I'll go ahead and unhide them. I'll just go ahead and check the visibility with a 1, and that'll bring those back. And you can see that we have a translation of the effect. So here's this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. And I didn't put the color on this one, so I just go ahead and right click. I'll go all the way down to Assign Existing, and I'll grab my my Phong one. Okay. Now I want to take my pieces here, and we have these nodes. If I open up Attributes, we have an Output Cloth node, and we need to get rid of that. So if that's on there, when we export this to Unreal, it's not going to take effect. So let me, for example, I'll take this number 4 here, and then I'll export selection. I'll make this SM_ balloon torn tutorial. And I don't really have anything else on it, but I'll just go ahead and export it. And then on Unreal, you grab my balloon. Here's my tutorial balloon. I'll go ahead and bring that in. And for the effect, it does need to be a skeletal mesh. I'll go ahead and check that. And I do want to make sure in my dropdown, this is usually collapsed. So in my little dropdown just before animation, also make sure animation is checked. But then in the dropdown before animation, we want to make sure that we have morph targets checked. And then you'll hit import. And you'll see that this comes in, and it looks normal. And it looks normal because the cloth node, that cloth transform effect did not stay. So what we want to do is we have to clear it off. And there are a few ways to do that. One is to export these as OBJs, and it'll drop the effect. The other is to just combine them and then separate them, and it'll clear the transforms there. Not sure why Maya doesn't allow these to be cleared when you use history. For example, if I go up to this one and I go edit, delete by type, and then I hit history, you can see that the cloth is still there. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab my balloons, and then I'll go to poly modeling, and then I'm going to combine it. And then I'm going to clear the history, which gives me a single object. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these red groups here. Get rid of those. And then for my my single object here, let's go ahead and separate it. So go up to mesh and then separate. And now I have all these, and I'll clear the history on them again. And then I'll open up the group here. Let's take all of our stuff out. So I'm going to grab all of it, not the top piece, middle mouse drag out, and then we can delete the group. Bit of a process, I know. So our fifth one is actually our balloon. So go ahead and rename these. This is going to be our terrible balloon. And then these are our explosions in order. So this should be the first explosion, second, third, and fourth. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just name those. Again, I'm on the poly surface 1 there. I'll do explosion. I'll do this as a 1, and I'll copy that. Then I'll go to the second one, paste that in. It should update for me, and there's 2, 3, and 4. So there are my 4 little animations, or my 4 frames for this animation. And then I want to take my balloon and we want to create a blend space. So make sure we're in modeling and then come up to deform, and you can see you have a blend shape option here. But using this is actually a pain in the butt. So I really hate this thing. Instead, come over to window and then come down to animation editors and open up the shape editor. Once you get used to the shape editor, it's actually a blessing because it lets you rename your blend shapes and make modifications to them. So I'm going to be working pretty much in this window for this. So I'm going to take my regular balloon and I hit create blend shape, and then I'm going to go ahead and just right click and rename, call that explosion, and then I'm going to grab the first frame, and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to add selected as target. So there's that one, and I'll go ahead and rename it. So there's explosion 1. Grab the second one, right click on the top bar, or top explosion, add selected as targets, rename it, and there's our explosion 2. And then I'll grab number 3, grab my top one, add, and then rename. And then my last one, I'll grab the explosion top, add it, rename it. And then there are all of our blend shapes under one blend node. And if I were to collapse that, grab the original one, you'll see that now we have the explosion on here. And if I open that up, we have each of our transitions. And if I grab one and middle mouse drag, you can see it starts to transition. And then if I grab the next one and I middle mouse drag, it transitions a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. And these are all all additive. So if all of these are on, you'll have a greater effect on number 4. If I turn these off, it'll reduce the effect a little bit, and then it goes back to the natural state. So just be aware of that these do add into each other. So to get the actual animation effect, I'm going to go to frame 1, and then however long I want this to be. Let's say I want this to run for 1 second, so I'm going to go down to 24 frames. And on frame 1, very simple, I'm going to open up Explosion, and I want Explosion 1 to be at 0, so just right-click and key it. Okay, so I'm going to go over to about 4 frames, and then I want to take my Explosion 1, I'm going to go ahead and set that to 1. So now here's my first stage, right? Now however quick this explosion is going to happen is up to you. I'm going to assume that the initial part of the explosion is a bit quicker, so I'm just going to jump over to maybe frame 6. And I'm going to come down to my frame 2 here. Don't worry about this frame skip too large. This is the simulation trying to run, but we're no longer using the simulation part. We're doing the manual part. So I'm going to go up from my frame 4 here. I need to have my explosion 2 start at 0, so go ahead and just set that to 0. And then I'm going to go some distance ahead. I'm assuming this explosion is going to be pretty quick, so I'm going to go to maybe frame 6. I'm going to set my explosion number 2 to 1, and then my explosion 1 to 0. Okay, that way they clear off. So this gets boom, and I get the effect to there. Okay, it's a bit of a jump, but it works. And then maybe these next few frames will be a bit slower. So I'm going to take my frame 3, and my frame 3 needs to be 0 at my at the ending of my second explosion. So I'm going to go ahead and just right-click and hit key. So frame 3 is 0 here. And I jump forward maybe to frame 12, and then I'll set frame 3 to 1, and then I'm going to set frame 2 to 0. Okay. And now you can see we have the explosion, and then it kind of flutters. Good. And then last one, frame 4 should start at 0. And then this is going to be my ending frame. That one's going to be at 1. And then frame 3 should be at 0 at that point. And we have this effect. So boom, it travels. Let's see how it plays in real time. So that's a bit of a weird one there. I should change the time that I have. So I'm going to grab my 2 frames that are keyed there. I'm going to hold Shift and then click on frame 24, and I'll drag that back to, I don't know, frame 15 or 16. And I'll drop my timeline to match, so I'll make this frame 16. And let's see how that runs. Okay, so this is going to be close enough for the approximation, so we have that and that little drift. So the next part is to export this. So I'm going to go up to File here, and then Export Selection. We're going to be doing FBX export, smoothing groups, smooth mesh, and reference asset. We want to make sure the animation is checked and that we have the correct number of frames for our bake animation, and that we also have blend shapes and skins checked. Okay, main one is blend shapes, but usually you just have those. And I'll do this one as SK for skeletal mesh, because our animated mesh should be a skeletal mesh. So that we're going to do this as terrible balloon. And this is a tutorial, so I'll grab that one. And I'll export. So that exports. No errors, no warnings, good. Let's jump into Unreal. You cannot re-import over a skeletal mesh, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete the old one. You can run the re-import, but it won't make any difference. So just clear it. And let's go ahead and just bring it back in by hand. So where is it? There it is. And again, this should be a skeletal mesh. Make sure that's checked. And import mesh is checked. And we have the morph targets are checked. We'll go ahead and import. And that should import. And you can see the animation does hold, which is nice. But there's a little bit of a weirdness going on. I'll kind of show you what that is. So go ahead and just hit pause here. And as this is going, you can see that it's not quite interpolating right. It has some moments where it just kind of pauses and hangs out and then does a thing. And so what you can do to kind of help it along, so what happens with interpolation is it makes guesses between the frames that you didn't bake. So if we go back to Maya, you can see that when we grab our explosions here, we have these gaps in between our frames, right? So Maya's making guesses about how to make the transition, okay? This should be traveling, you know, up, and then we get this like weird draping thing happening. Instead of Unreal, we have the initial up, and then it kind of waits, and then it floats up. I don't know which is better, which one you like better, but that's not what we have baked. So what I'm going to do is grab the balloon here. Let's go up to Animation, and then go to Key. Come down to Bake Simulation, hit the options. And I'm just going to just reset my settings. And then the defaults are pretty fine. Control Point should bake vertices, but I haven't had much luck with it. So maybe it's because of the version of Maya that I'm in. I don't know. But I'm going to keep the defaults here. I'm going to go ahead and hit Bake. And that's going to go through and bake all of the positions. And then I'm going to take this and re-export it. So export selection. There's my terrible balloon. I'll go ahead and just re-export. All of my other settings should be the same. I'm going to delete the old one, again, because it doesn't quite work when you want to re-import it. So get rid of that. And then I'll drag it in again. Settings are as they are. Hit import. And now it should be a much more appropriate transition. Not really seeing too much of a difference though. Let's see how that looks. Looks like it's jumping. But there you go. That's pretty much it. So it, boom, and you can play with your animations in Maya and bake them out, and you can see that the animation comes in already ready for you to go. So all you have to do to call this animation, real simple. I'm going to make a blueprint in here. So right click, blueprint class. I'll create an actor. I'll call this balloon. And then inside the blueprint, we'll add a skeletal mesh. Call that balloon. I'll load the skeletal mesh here. I'm not going to set an animation asset, but I will change the animation mode. So I'm going to change this to use animation asset. And you can see now I have an animation to play. And if I do put my animation in there, it will run. I'm going to keep this empty. Go to my balloon here. Let's go ahead and put a collision on here. Let's do capsule. Let's see what that looks like. So just the half height. Close enough. So now I'm going to go ahead and clear these out. Grab my capsule. We will set the begin overlap. Very good. And this one I'm going to cast to the third person character, so do cast to third person character because that's the project that I'm in. So whoever overlaps with it. And if that happens, we want to take our balloon here. I'm going to do play animation. And, set this up. And then we'll set my animation to my terrible balloon animation. And then I'll play it. And if I walk over it, bam, I pop the balloon, right? Of course, it doesn't look really cool if it just hangs there. So you can set physics so it falls, or you can have it delete itself. So for example, I'm just going to go ahead and just delete it. So I'll do destroy. Destroy actor. And I do want this to wait a second, so maybe delay I'll do 0.75. It should be good. I don't want it to quite stop. Bam. And there's the balloon, and it, you know, did what it did, and it popped. So that's pretty much it on how to get the animations in. You can do that for like capes. You can do it for like flags that are always running. You can have them loop. So if you need to run animations on mobile, or you just want to find a cheap way to do simulations without having to run a full simulation in the background, this is kind of like the cheap way of doing it. So anyway, I hope you found this one helpful or educational. And if you like this kind of stuff, let me know. I do want to give a quick shout out to my patrons, JTechFab, Dr. Jeb, and Richard Beston. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you want to see my videos, you know, a couple weeks ahead of time, check out my Patreon. Everything goes there first, and they get dispersed throughout the season, throughout the year. So if you want to see things early, you should head over there. Anyway, that's it for this one, and I shall see you next time. Hey guys, thanks for checking out my channel. Misty and I both thank you. If you enjoyed that video just watched, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Also, we're at 1,400 subscribers. Woo! If you have any suggestions for future videos, go ahead and leave them down in the comments. And if you want to keep up with me on Twitter, it's BruceRF1. That's also in the description. And if you want to support the channel, make it easier for me to make content for you, check out some of my merch or one of my books. But yeah, all that, again, is in the description. Check it out, and I shall see you next time.